When she checked social media, her heart dropped. A blog headline blared, "Is Rose Bennett dating a fraud?" The article claimed Ryan Carter's tech foundation was a front, questioning his wealth and accusing him of dating Rose for status. There were blurry photos, half-truths, and anonymous sources. By the time she reached the dining room, Charles was already seated, the article printed and folded beside his tea. He said nothing at first, just slid it toward her. Rose picked it up. "It's nonsense." Charles looked at her. "Do you believe that?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Ryan would never." "He's not your husband, Rose," David cut in, entering the room with Daniel and Eric. "You've known him for months, not years." "I've known him enough to trust him," she snapped. "You all agreed to give him a chance." Eric sighed. "And now the world is watching. If this is true, it won't just hurt you. It'll embarrass the family." Claire stepped in quietly. Or maybe it's just someone trying to stir trouble now that she's stepping into her own light. Rose's hands trembled slightly. "I'm going to talk to Ryan." David stood, blocking her path. "Not until we verify everything. Our own investigator is looking into it now." She stared at him in disbelief. "You don't trust me." Charles finally spoke. "We trust you, Rose. We don't trust the world around you." Her heart ached. Upstairs in his apartment, Ryan was already reading the article. His jaw tightened, but his eyes burned with something deeper than fear or resolve. If the past few weeks were a test of skill, what came next would be a test of truth. And not everyone was ready for it. Rose stormed out of the mansion that afternoon, her emotions boiling over. She didn't care about the cameras, the headlines, or the whispers in the hallway. All she wanted was the truth from Ryan's own lips. She found him on the balcony of his apartment, staring into the sky, the tabloid still in his hand. "You saw it?" she asked quietly. He turned. "Yeah." She hesitated. "Is any of it true?" Ryan looked into her eyes, the hurt clear in his own. "No, but that doesn't mean it won't hurt us." "Then who did this?" she pressed. "I don't know," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. "But someone's trying hard to tear me down." Rose sat beside him. "My brothers are already digging through your past. If there's something they'll find." "There's nothing I'm ashamed of," he interrupted. "But I didn't come from wealth, Rose. I built everything from scratch. My startup struggled for years before we made it. Maybe that makes me an easy target." She reached for his hand. "I don't care where you came from. I care about who you are now." They sat in silence for a moment before Ryan added, "Whoever's behind this, they're not finished. And if your family starts doubting again..." "They won't," she said firmly. "They promised. I'll hold them to it." But even as she spoke, she could feel the pressure closing in, the spotlight growing hotter, the family more divided. Inside the mansion, Eric received a call. His investigator had traced the leak to an anonymous account, but behind it was a name he recognized. Not a journalist, not a stranger, someone much closer than they expected. The real enemy wasn't outside. It was already inside the circle. Eric paced his bedroom floor, phone still in hand. The investigator's words echoed in his ears. The leak came from someone using the mansion's secure Wi-Fi, and the login matched an employee's ID, someone with access to the family wing. His jaw tightened. Whoever it was hadn't just tried to sabotage Ryan, they had gone behind the family's back to do it. Downstairs, the mansion carried on like nothing had happened. Rose stayed close to Ryan, while Charles remained unusually quiet. David and Daniel reviewed statements from their PR team, trying to contain the spread. Eric marched into Claire's study without knocking. She raised a brow. "Something wrong?" "It was someone in this house," he said, voice low. "Someone with access." Claire's expression darkened. "A staff member?" He shook his head. "Too careful." This person wanted to leave just enough dirt to cast doubt, not destroy him completely. Claire frowned. "You think it's one of your brothers?" Eric hesitated, then slowly said, "David never liked Ryan. He accepted the tests, but never the man." Claire stood. "Before you accuse your own blood, be sure. Dig deeper." Meanwhile, Rose and Ryan sat under the gazebo. She was sketching loosely on a pad, his silhouette outlined with gentle strokes. "You're still calm," Ryan said softly. "I trust you," she replied, "but I don't trust how quiet my brothers are." Just then, Luke approached them, looking uneasy. "Rose, you need to come inside." She stood quickly. "What is it?" "Dad just called a meeting, and he looks angry." Within minutes, the family gathered in the study. Charles stood at the center, holding a printed report in his hand. "There's been a betrayal," he said grimly, "from someone under this roof." Everyone went still, but no one was prepared for the name he was about to call. The room fell into a chilling silence. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed louder than breath. Charles looked at each of his children slowly before placing the report on the table. "The person who leaked Ryan's background and fed false claims to the media is someone I trusted." He turned his eyes to the one person no one expected. "Daniel!" A stunned silence followed. Daniel's brows lifted in disbelief. "Me? That's ridiculous." Eric stepped forward, tossing down his own copy of the investigator's findings. "Your login credentials were used. Your email was traced to the anonymous submission. And you've never liked Ryan from the start." "I was cautious, not malicious," Daniel snapped. "I would never try to humiliate Rose like this." "But you did," Rose whispered, stepping forward. "Why?" Daniel's eyes flickered between them, then landed on Charles. "Because I've watched too many people come close to this family for the wrong reasons. I didn't want her to be another mistake." "She's not a child anymore," Claire said gently. "She doesn't need protecting. She needs supporting." Ryan stayed quiet, his expression unreadable. Daniel turned to him. "You charmed her. You impressed us. But I couldn't just sit back and hope you were genuine. And now you've lost the very thing you were trying to protect," Charles said firmly. "Her trust." Daniel looked at Rose, his little sister, now staring at him with pain in her eyes. "I loved you like a daughter," he murmured. "You loved your fear more," she replied. Charles walked away without another word. The room emptied slowly, leaving Daniel standing alone in his guilt. Outside, Rose held Ryan's hand tighter than ever. The storm had passed, but the scars of betrayal would take longer to heal. And trust, once broken, would never return the same. The atmosphere in the Bennett mansion was no longer tense. It was quiet. Too quiet. The kind that settled after a storm but left everything soaked in silence. Daniel had isolated himself in his wing of the house, avoiding family meals and conversations. No one spoke of the betrayal openly, but it hung in the air like a thick fog. Rose moved through the mansion with a new kind of strength, still gentle, but unshakable. She didn't cry. Not this time. One evening, Claire found Daniel sitting in the study, staring at the fireplace. "You look like your father when he was younger," she said softly. Daniel sighed. "I didn't mean to hurt her." "But you did," Claire replied, "because you didn't trust her to make her own choices. Just like Charles didn't trust me once." Daniel turned to her. "What changed?" Claire smiled sadly. "He let go." Meanwhile, in the garden, Ryan found Rose sketching again, this time the mansion itself. She'd drawn the gates wide open. He sat beside her. "You've been quiet." "I'm thinking," she said, "about forgiveness." Ryan raised a brow. "You're going to forgive him?" "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But if I carry bitterness, I'll never be free. And that's all I've ever wanted, to be free." He nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You already are. You just don't see it yet." Later that night, Daniel stood outside Rose's door, hesitant. Finally, he knocked. She opened it slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. "I wasn't trying to control you. I just didn't know how to let go." Rose's eyes softened. "Then start learning." And for the first time in days, she hugged him, lightly, briefly. It wasn't full forgiveness, but it was a beginning. For the first time in her life, Rose sat alone in the family's grand conference room, not as someone being spoken for, but as someone preparing to speak. Claire had arranged a charity event in Rose's name, showcasing her art to raise funds for young women in creative fields. The idea was Rose's. The execution, however, had become the responsibility of the entire Bennett name. Still, this time, no one was guiding her speech. No one was rewriting her story. She stood before the mirror, practicing. "I used to live in the shadow of my last name, but now I live in the light of my own dreams." Downstairs, Ryan adjusted his suit in the foyer, surrounded by Luke, Eric, and even David, who, after everything, was now the one straightening Ryan's tie. She's stronger than all of us, Luke muttered. No doubt, Eric said with a smile. The gala began at sunset. Guests in fine gowns and tuxedos filled the large glass ballroom. Paintings lined the walls, Rose's work. Each one told a story of protection, rebellion, discovery, and love. When it was time, Rose stepped up to the stage. She looked stunning in a sleek emerald gown, her hair natural and free. The room hushed as she stood at the mic. My name is Rose Bennett, she began. My name is Rose Bennett, she began, her voice steady but warm. And for a long time, I didn't know who I was outside this mansion. The audience leaned in. I was the little sister, the precious daughter, the one everyone loved and protected. But sometimes love, when wrapped too tightly, becomes a cage. In the front row, Charles sat beside Claire, his expression unreadable. Ryan watched from the side, pride shining in his eyes. 4 years, I let others speak for me, choose for me, decide what I could handle. And maybe they meant well, but it stopped me from learning who I truly am. She paused, glancing at the crowd. Some familiar, some not. Then her gaze rested on her father. But this year I made a choice. I decided to speak, to love, to fail and try again. And the girl you once had to shield is now a woman standing here by her own will. The room erupted into applause. I'm dedicating this exhibition to every girl who's ever been told she wasn't ready. Who's ever been hidden behind love. You are ready, and you deserve to shine in your own light. Her final words were soft but firm. I am not just a Bennett. I am Rose, and I'm just getting started. The standing ovation was loud and emotional. Charles remained seated, but his eyes glistened. For the first time, he saw his daughter, not just the baby of the family, but a woman of her own making. Backstage, Ryan met her with open arms. You were incredible, he whispered. I finally feel like myself, she replied. And this time, her smile wasn't for anyone else's approval. It was for her. Later that night, after the gala, the Bennett mansion felt unusually quiet. The guests were gone, the lights dimmed, but Rose's speech still echoed in the hearts of everyone who had heard it. Charles stood alone in his study, sipping a glass of scotch, staring at an old photo of Rose as a child sitting on his shoulders. The pride was still there, but so was the ache of time slipping through his fingers. Claire entered softly. She did well, she said. She did more than well, Charles admitted. She proved us all wrong. Claire smiled. No, she proved she was ready. There's a difference. He sighed, setting the glass down. It's hard, watching your child grow beyond your reach. She's not beyond you, Charles. She just doesn't need saving anymore. She needs believing. Charles nodded, his shoulders a little heavier. Meanwhile, Rose and Ryan sat on the balcony upstairs, away from the noise. Her heels were off, hair loose, and she looked more like herself than ever before. You said something in your speech, Ryan murmured. Wrapped too tightly, love becomes a cage. She looked at him. You felt it too. He nodded. But now it's different. You're not caged anymore. You're choosing your path. And I'm choosing you, she whispered. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars. Downstairs, Charles picked up his phone and sent a message to the family group chat. Family meeting tomorrow. No arguments. 10 a.m. No one replied, but they all read it. He had something to say. And this time, it would come from a father learning to let go. By 10 a.m. sharp, the Bennetts were gathered in the drawing room. David, Eric, Daniel, Luke, Claire, Rose, and Ryan. The silence was thick with curiosity. No one knew why Charles had called the meeting. He stood by the window, dressed in his usual crisp suit, but today his presence felt different, less commanding, more human. I've spent the last few days thinking, Charles began, his voice low but steady, about what it means to be a father, especially to a daughter. Rose blinked in surprise. Charles rarely spoke about emotions. When your mother passed, I promised myself I would protect you all. I built this house as a fortress. I gave you everything. Money, security, my time. But what I didn't give was freedom. He turned to Rose. I watched you grow, but I never really let you grow. I was so afraid of losing you that I nearly smothered your light. Rose's eyes glistened. The room was still. To my sons, Charles continued, glancing at them. You became gatekeepers, following my lead. But perhaps it's time we stop guarding her and start cheering her on. He looked at Ryan now. You've shown resilience, respect, and restraint. Qualities I didn't expect, but admire. I'm not giving my daughter away. She isn't a prize. But if she chooses to walk beside you, I won't stand in her way. Ryan gave a quiet nod, emotion in his eyes. Charles stepped back and exhaled. That's all. Claire smiled proudly. David looked humbled. Even Daniel dropped his gaze, the sting of guilt still present. Rose stood, walked over to her father, and hugged him tightly. Thank you, she whispered. He didn't speak. But for the first time in years, Charles Bennet hugged her back. 2 weeks later, the Bennet estate was alive with gentle music and soft laughter. Rose had decided to host a small garden soiree, not for publicity, not for appearances, but to celebrate a quiet truth, freedom, family, and love. Ryan stood by the fountain, chatting with Eric and Luke. They no longer watched him with suspicion, but with something closer to brotherly teasing. Word is, you make better jollof rice than Rose now, Luke joked. Ryan grinned. I'd never say that out loud. I like staying alive. Meanwhile, Rose sat with Claire under a floral canopy, sipping from a glass of Zobo. I never imagined this day, Rose said, smiling. My brother's laughing with him, my father finally breathing. Claire chuckled. You didn't just win their approval, Rose. You changed their hearts. That's something even money can't buy. Just then, David approached, clearing his throat awkwardly. Rose looked up. You're not here to argue, are you? He gave a small smile. Not today. Just wanted to say, I was wrong. About him. About you needing protection. Rose blinked, surprised. You've always had strength, David added. I just never stopped to see it. She stood and hugged him, surprising them both. Near sunset, Ryan took her hand and led her toward the center of the garden. With no microphone, no speeches, and no crowd, he knelt on one knee and pulled out a simple gold ring. I don't want to complete you, he said softly. You're already whole. I just want to walk beside you. Tears welled in Rose's eyes. Yes, she whispered. And when her family erupted into cheers, laughter, and joy. For the first time in the mansion's long, guarded history, love was no longer a test. It was a choice. The morning of the engagement celebration, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Bennet mansion. Everything felt different now, lighter, warmer. The walls that once echoed with formality now carried laughter, music, and the scent of blooming jasmine from the gardens. Rose stood before her mirror in a soft cream dress, her curls pinned loosely. Her reflection wasn't the same timid girl from months ago. This woman was confident, free, and in love on her own terms. Claire entered quietly. Ready. Rose turned and smiled. More than ever. Outside, the family gathered beneath a grand canopy. The same garden that had once hosted cold dinners now glowed with fairy lights and joy. Ryan stood with Charles and the brothers, chatting like an old friend. As Rose approached, Charles stepped forward and gently took her hand. You've taught me something no amount of money ever could, he said. How to trust. She squeezed his hand. You just needed time. He smiled, then turned to Ryan. Take care of her. Not because she needs it, but because she deserves it. I will, sir, Ryan said. The ceremony was simple, just family, a few close friends, and heartfelt vows whispered under a golden sky. Later that evening, Rose wandered alone to the back of the garden. Ryan found her there, gazing at the stars. Do you think we'll be all right? She asked. He took her hand. We already are. Behind them, the sounds of celebration carried through the night. Not loud or forced, but real. For the first time, every member of the Bennet family stood on the same side. And Rose, the once sheltered last-born, had become the woman who changed them all. It wasn't just the end of a love story. It was the beginning of a legacy. Months after the engagement, the Bennet mansion had settled into a new rhythm. Gone were the rigid schedules and overprotective glances. In their place, Sunday dinners filled with laughter, group chats filled with memes, and a renewed sense of peace. Rose had opened her first art studio in town, the Bloom Gallery, with full support from her father and brothers. It was small, sunlit, and filled with bold, unapologetic colors. Young artists from across the city came to learn, to create, and to find their own voices. One afternoon, Charles visited unannounced. He walked through the studio, admiring the unfinished canvases, and stopped before one of Rose's newest works, a portrait of the family, loosely sketched but filled with warmth. "She painted me smiling," he muttered, half amused. Rose laughed from behind. "You do smile. You've just forgotten how often." Charles turned, his face softer than usual. "This place, it's more than a studio. It's who you were always meant to be." She nodded. "I couldn't have done it without all of you, especially Claire." He smiled. "She always had more sense than the rest of us." Meanwhile, Ryan had launched a mentorship program for underprivileged youth, teaching business basics and digital skills. He and Rose weren't just building a life together, they were building something bigger than themselves. Back at the mansion, Claire watched from the patio as her grown children, once guarded, divided, now sat together planning the wedding. David argued over food options, Luke tried to sneak in a live band, and Eric offered to design the invitation. "I always knew they'd come around," Claire whispered to herself. Inside, Rose returned from the studio just in time to hear her brothers laughing over her childhood photos. She shook her head, smiling. The mansion hadn't changed, but the hearts inside it had, and that was the true legacy. The Bennett mansion had never been this alive. Every corner bloomed with flowers, ivory roses, gold-tipped tulips, and soft pink hibiscus. The air buzzed with excitement as guests arrived in vibrant aso-ebi and tailored suits. But inside the bridal suite, Rose stood completely still. She looked at herself in the mirror, dressed in a flowing white gown with lace sleeves and delicate beadwork that shimmered like morning dew. Her hair was styled in soft curls, a simple pearl headband resting on top. Claire stood beside her, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "You've grown so much, my darling," she said gently. "Not just into a bride, but into a woman with a voice." Rose turned, her voice calm. "I used to think I needed to wait for permission to live, but I don't anymore. I'm finally walking into my life." Downstairs, the brothers had swapped suits for coordinated abatas in deep royal blue. Luke, ever the joker, fixed Ryan's collar while muttering, "If you mess this up, we're all moving into your house." Ryan laughed nervously. No pressure at all. The ceremony was held in the back garden, under a golden canopy. As Rose walked down the aisle, Charles stood, tears filling his eyes but not falling. He didn't try to stop her. This time, he let her go freely. Ryan met her at the altar, eyes filled with awe and steady love. "I don't promise you perfection," he whispered during his vows. "But I promise honesty, laughter, and a home wherever you are." And Rose replied, her voice clear and strong, "I don't need saving. Just someone to run beside me." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the guests erupted in joy. The mansion's gates, once symbols of protection, now stood wide open to a future no longer ruled by fear. The last-born had become a bride, and the mansion had finally become a home. Rose and Ryan's honeymoon wasn't a flashy overseas trip or a photo-perfect Instagram getaway. Instead, they chose something simple, 10 days at a quiet lakeside resort in Joss, surrounded by hills, peace, and nature. No security, no staff, no schedule, just the two of them. They woke each morning to the sound of birds and brewed their own coffee. Rose spent hours sketching the landscape, her fingers finally relaxed, her heart wide open. Ryan read, cooked, and sometimes just watched her draw, amazed by the calm joy in her eyes. "This is what I want for us," she said one evening as they sat by a small bonfire. "A life that's soft and honest. Not perfect, just real." Ryan leaned back against the log and nodded. "With you, real is more than enough." Back at the mansion, Charles missed his daughter's chatter in the mornings. Claire found him standing by Rose's favorite balcony more than once. "She'll be back," she teased. "You'll just have to knock before entering now." The brothers had already turned Rose's old room into a shared home library project, a sign that life was moving forward for them too. When Rose and Ryan returned, it wasn't to grand welcomes or fanfare. It was to laughter, a homemade dinner, and a table full of family who had finally learned that love wasn't about control, it was about freedom and trust. Later that night, as Rose unpacked, she found a handwritten note from Claire tucked in her bag. "You were never meant to be caged. You were always meant to fly. And now you're soaring." Rose smiled, held the note close to her heart, and whispered to herself, "I finally am." And for the first time in her life, she felt truly, completely free. A year had passed since the wedding, and the Bennett mansion was no longer just a symbol of wealth. It was alive with change, laughter, and purpose. Rose's art gallery had expanded to include mentorship workshops. Young girls from across the city now flocked to the Bloom Gallery, not just to learn how to paint, but to dream out loud. Rose had become a quiet icon, proof that a woman could be strong, soft, and successful all at once. Ryan's Mentorship Foundation had partnered with Rose's gallery to provide education through art. Together, they were building a legacy rooted in empowerment. One sunny Saturday, Rose hosted an open exhibition at the gallery. As guests browsed the vibrant paintings, Charles arrived quietly, dressed in a casual shirt, something no one had seen him wear in years. He walked slowly through the gallery, stopping in front of a painting titled The Gate. It showed a girl standing before towering golden gates, her back straight, her hand on the handle, ready to step out. The gates were open. Rose appeared beside him. "It's the first painting I finished after the wedding." Charles stared at it for a moment, then turned to her. "I see it now. You weren't running away. You were stepping into yourself." She smiled. "And you let me." Later that evening, the entire Bennett family gathered at the mansion. Ryan grilled fish in the garden, Luke played music, Eric chased the little nieces and nephews around, and David actually laughed, a deep, belly laugh Rose hadn't heard in years. As the stars came out, Claire raised a glass. "To growth, to change, and to Rose," she said, beaming. "The light that taught this family how to breathe again." Everyone cheered. And Rose. She sat back in her chair, Ryan's arm around her, the people she loved all around. The mansion hadn't just opened its gates. It had opened its heart. It was a bright morning as Rose stood on the podium at the University of Lagos, addressing a hall full of graduates. She had been invited as a keynote speaker, artist, advocate, and Bennett legacy. But she didn't speak as someone's daughter. She spoke as herself. "I was born into privilege," she began, "but I wasn't born into freedom." The room went silent, listening. For a long time, I was the little sister, the protected one. My family meant well, but they wrapped me so tightly in love that I forgot how to breathe on my own. She paused, letting the words settle. But I found my voice. I painted my way out of silence. I made choices that scared me. And I loved a man who didn't try to fix me, but walked beside me while I fixed myself. In the front row, Ryan watched her proudly, fingers laced together. Beside him, Charles sat tall, no longer afraid to see his daughter lead. "To every young woman here today," Rose continued, "don't wait for permission. Don't shrink to fit into someone else's idea of safety. Grow wild, grow full, and grow free." Thunderous applause followed. Later that evening, she and Ryan returned to their modest new home, not the mansion. They had chosen a quieter life just outside the city, where art, love, and peace coexisted. At the entrance of their house hung a hand-painted sign. "The House of Rose." It wasn't about wealth or status. It was about growth. Inside, a letter from Claire waited on the table. It simply read, "You've done more than rise, Rose. You've bloomed." And with a smile, Rose walked inside. The mansion made her, but the world was finally hers.